I now give the floor to Mr. Martin Griffiths. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, and it's a source of considerable pride for me to be sitting at the side of the most distinguished Special Envoy that we have here in Geir, and his remarks are very telling today. Thank you very much also, Geir, to be your colleague and partner. Mr. President, since I assumed the role of Emergency Relief Coordinator almost 3 years ago, I've spoken to you numerous times in these monthly sessions on the humanitarian situation in Syria. So I'm grateful, of course, to do this again today. This will be my last briefing in person, although not my last briefing to the Council virtually before my departure at the end of June. But my involvement, Mr. President, in the UN response to the Syrian crisis goes back almost to the start of the conflict, when I had the good fortune to serve 3 special envoys and the deputy head, and became the deputy head also of the observer mission in 2012. And so by the time I was appointed as emergency relief coordinator, the plight and the future and the situation and the circumstances of the Syrian people were embedded into my approach and psyche and belief about the world. And the humanitarian situation that I encountered as I entered OCHA had been raging for over a decade. During my time in office, in this job, I visited Syria 4 times, more than any other crisis, which I think reflects the severity of the crisis and the opportunities, as Geir has been pointing out, which are specific and practical and needed. But 3 years after rejoining OCHA, as I prepare to step down, of course it pains me and it pains all of us that the suffering of the people of Syria grinds on. More people, indeed, need humanitarian assistance now than at any time in this conflict. We believe about 16.7 million people need humanitarian assistance. It's getting worse year by year. And it's a protection crisis. Children continue to be killed. Women and girls continue to fear for their safety. And across Syria, more than 7 million people remain displaced. A figure surpassed only, tragically, by Sudan. Millions of others continue to be refugees in neighboring countries, and we take note and respect hugely the welcome and the support given to them by those host countries. Thank you very much indeed for that, and we know how much of a burden that is. And a recurring issue in my briefing over the years has been the importance of sustained access. Geir has referred to that, through all modalities, cross-border or cross-line or direct. Since 2014, the cross-border operation from Turkey has provided a lifeline to millions of people in need in northwest Syria. Following the lapse, we all lived through this last year, of the Security Council's authorization for the operation, it continues. This operation continues to function effectively under the consent of the government of Syria, for which we're grateful. I welcome the recent decision, indeed, by the government to extend its permission of the use of Bab al-Salam and Al-Raib border crossings for an additional 3 months until 13th of August of this year. I hope permission to use Bab al-Hawa will likewise be extended beyond the 13th of July, and that consent for the use of all crossings, indeed, will be provided for as long as humanitarian needs persist. They should be defined not by months, but by needs. As I've emphasized repeatedly, also, cross-line deliveries are a critical tool for reaching people in need throughout Syria. And we remember the words of the Secretary General when we were meeting about the renewal of the cross-border operation. He emphasized the need for all forms of access to be provided for the people of Syria. Cross-line deliveries in the northwest remain, to use that word that we use so often, challenging, more than they should be. We've gone nearly a year now without such a mission. I'm encouraged by signs that a mission could go ahead in the coming days, and I hope it will generate some critical momentum for more regular deliveries, which we know are essential. I'm also encouraged, thanks to several weeks of effort and a show of commitment by all parties, for the cross-line assessment mission to the Aluk water station on the 21st of May. That water station, as you know, Mr. President, has been out of operation since the 5th of October last year, when multiple airstrikes in the northeast damaged the electricity network. And as the main water source for more than 610,000 people in the Al-Hasaka governorate, it's critical that its operation is restored ahead of the coming summer months. And as a direct consequence of the severe water, fuel, and electricity crisis, women in particular are struggling to meet their hygiene needs, and malnutrition rates have risen dramatically in a direct consequence of the damage to that network. Another issue that has far too frequently been the subject of our discussions, and Gare referred to it, is the protection of civilians. Although the level of hostilities has thankfully subsided from its peak, fighting continues as a reality to many civilians. Syrian women and girls continue to be exposed to negative coping mechanisms, appalling levels of gender-based violence, including sexual violence, exploitation, and abuse. Daily fighting at its fiercest, as we've heard, in northwest Syria, continues to cause civilian injury and death, including children, and the damage that Gare also described of detentions and inhumanity. And it continues to harm the humanitarian response. A recent uptick in hostilities in Deir ez-Zor governorate in eastern Syria, in very close proximity to the UN hub and other humanitarian premises, damaged humanitarian assets and led to the temporary suspension of humanitarian operations. Not something that we wanted to see. Allow me to reiterate, therefore, Mr. President, what you've heard from me repeatedly over the past 3 years, and also from Gare. All parties have obligations under international humanitarian law to protect civilians and civilian objects. This includes taking constant care to spare civilians and objects, and including their humanitarian personnel and assets in the course of military operations. And it includes allowing access, rapid and unimpeded passage of relief, and the movement of workers. Mr. President, perhaps one of the biggest concerns for the months and years to come relates to underfunding for the humanitarian response. As humanitarian needs, as I have said at the beginning, continue to rise in Syria, as the poverty line continues to draw more people in, for all kinds of reasons that we will no doubt discuss, so does the importance of sustained support for the people of Syria in their humanitarian needs. And with the courage and resolve that I witnessed in the aftermath of the earthquakes last year and throughout my time in office, the humanitarian community doesn't walk away. We stay, we deliver as we can, as we must, as we should. This includes an emphasis on early recovery efforts. I was recently last week in Doha and Abu Dhabi and talked extensively to the authorities there about the need for funding for early recovery in Syria. It does, as Gare has described, it is an essential component, not only for the welfare of people across Syria, but also to the planning and possibilities of refugee safe and voluntary return. We cannot do any of this without adequate funding. We've seen a steady reduction in funding levels over the past 3 years. 55% funded in 2021, 39% last year. We've had a good senior officials meeting in Brussels. We need a bit of time to see where those pledges go, but at the moment, I have to say that we are, in the middle of the year, 9% funded for the humanitarian response plan for Syria. So it's never been this bad, and the needs have never been this large. We obviously are very thankful to the European Union and donors for their continued support. Many of the donors are here in this room. And of course, as usual, we always ask for more. Mr. President, the humanitarian response in Syria is essential to saving lives and alleviating suffering, but it is not part of and it cannot provide a solution to the crisis. The only sustainable solution, that's why I'm so pleased to be sitting next to the Special Envoy, is, as set out in 2254, via an inclusive Syrian-led political process that meets the legitimate aspirations of the people. And I want to take the opportunity in public, as I have said in private, to bear witness to the extraordinary work of Geir Pedersen on behalf of the Syrian people. He never stops, he never sleeps. Over the past 3 years, there have been moments when the greater good has, at least to some degree, overcome the political deadlock. That's what we hoped to see after those earthquakes, and we thought we had opportunities which have yet to be realized. When Syria was overwhelmed by the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, commitments made by all the parties allowed for the timely rollout and delivery of vaccines across the country. Can be done. The fact that it can be done and it isn't is a shame on all of us. The government of Syria adopted emergency measures after the earthquake, and the government of Turkey did the same, the earthquake affecting their people, allowing urgent access for relief efforts. Sanctions measures were eased. The flash appeal was fully funded. I think it was a standout achievement last year. The flash appeal was fully funded, and we're still grateful for the facilitation of our own access of our staff that continues to this day as a result of decisions made in Damascus right after that earthquake. And we have many, many cross-border missions as a result. Thank you very much. It's essential for our oversight of the process and our understanding of the needs. But, Mr. President, we cannot wait for the next appalling cataclysm to come to make genuine progress towards ending this catastrophe. As the economic crisis deepens, regional tensions, Gare referred to the war in Gaza, threaten the safety, security, and prospects of the Syrian people. So I end, as I began, with the appeal to this Council to support the efforts of the Special Envoy and his work on behalf of all of us and on behalf of the Syrian people. This is the priority. Thank you very much.
I thank Mr. Griffiths for his briefing.